I'm going to do a quick introduction. My name's Evan Jones. I run a company called Stitch Media. We're an interactive production company that works with a lot of different traditional media sources and combines things, does a lot of transmedia production, and has been getting into more traditional production as well. So a lot of different work, but we've always had our inspiration in the interactive world, and as a result, you take for granted some of those things that you see all the time. And one of those things is progress bars. And so today, for a lark, I thought I would see if we could actually spend an entire hour discussing progress bars and finding out what they're all about. And so I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room knows what a progress bar is. I've got one up on the screen for you in case you've forgotten. Is there anyone who's unfamiliar and I need to clarify this? Okay, wonderful. We're already at the advanced talk stage, so we're jumping well ahead. And so because you've woken up so early, I do have a promise to you, which is that I promise that I will become 70% naked in this presentation. And I will start with this warm jacket that I need to get rid of to really let loose and enjoy myself up on this discussion. So you can see there that our hashtag is Progress Bar. I'm sure that the controversial nudity will drive crowds and crowds of people into the event, so I look forward to that. But what I wanted to start with was a discussion about how progress bars are really not something that is a computer-based phenomenon. Progress bars have been a part of our lives for a long, long time, and we've just taken that for granted. We're actually using this metaphor that's a part of our everyday lives as well. And so what I wanted to do was show you some examples. This is a quite famous one, the hourglass. We've seen the parallel of the hourglass online, but the hourglass here, specifically with the Wicked Witch of the West, we know what's going to happen when the red sand gets to the bottom of that. Things like advent calendars are visual representations of progress through time towards a goal. And there are lots and lots of sort of meat-based versions of progress bars that I just wanted you to think about, to open your mind a little bit about how progress bars are not just a line across a screen. The original progress bar, if you look at the very first computer-human interaction discussions and papers, are called thermometers. They go through and use this parallel of the fundraising thermometer as their metaphor for what these progress bars are going to be. And so somewhere along the line we flipped and we started calling them progress bars, but originally thermometers was the way that we thought of them. This is one of the oldest versions that I could find. This is from the 9th century. This is something that was invented, a candle clock, invented by King Alfred the Great. And the way that it worked is obviously it had demarcations of time, and as the candle ran down, it would burn, and you would see as you progressed to the end. And you would think, okay, well, that's just a clock, but it actually had a really interesting function, which is that it had an alarm clock in it. And the way that it worked is you would stick a nail in the side of a candle clock, and as the wax burned down, eventually the wax would soften enough that the nail would fall out and hit a bell. And it was one of the very first alarm clocks, timers, the way that progress was measured in our world. So, despite that being more than a millennia old, it might shock you to know that there actually is a patent on progress bars. I may actually find myself in a patent infringement for even discussing this. Thank you. I can be much louder. I can be much, much louder. I'll just hold it a lot closer. So, what I was saying was that there is a patent on progress bars. It was filed in 1990. It is EP0394160. And if you go searching for that, you will find that it's a description of a line that tracks progress over time to an endpoint. It gives quite a vivid description of a progress bar, and it is owned. So a concept that has been with us for many, many, many years is now a part of this whole technology patenting ideas sort of controversy as well. And there's been some interesting discussions about that. So I am putting forward today that actually progress bars are speaking to something a little more instinctual in us. And I go all the way back to spear throwing here, in that we have always needed an ability to track linear motion through time and to know where it's going to end up at a certain amount of time. Spear throwing, to be able to hit a moving target, is something that we've been trained to do right from the start. Throwing and being able to judge that, and it's a skill that we have of being able to see a line moving along and say, I can pretty much close my eyes at this point and say when it's going to end. That's why pickpockets have learned that you can't do normal things when you're pickpocketing people, because we're so good at knowing the path of a straight line. Pickpockets actually have to do something different. They have to develop a technique of arcing their movement, because pickpockets have to find a way to disrupt your expectations. If I see somebody reaching for my pocket, before they're even close, I know when they're going to hit that pocket, because I'm so good at predicting. And so pickpockets have developed these arcs and sort of saccades that they use to move in different formation, which breaks up our expectation of motion, because this is such an instinctual thing. I think this is a familiar sight for anyone who's been to South by Southwest in the past. I'm trying to put through the idea that when you abstract progress bars, you really start to see them everywhere. A line tells me how long it's going to take me to get to the front and to achieve my goal. And it also tells me the estimated length of time that this event is going to take place. And so there's a lot of places that we see progress bars that are outside of the computer space. And what I'm going to talk about today is whether or not the computer space is actually going to remain, because it's an interesting trend on whether or not wait times are still a part of this. So, we're at the next stage. I needed to become 20% naked, so there we go. And I'll move along. And I thought it would make sense to go through. This is a loose description, but a little tongue-in-cheek. I wanted to talk about the commandments of the perfect progress bar. And this is about trying to find a sort of platonic ideal progress bar in our world. And what does that look like? Because what we'll find is that I'll be showing lots of places where progress bars we use every day actually break these rules. So the first commandment: thy progress bar shall be quantified and have an endpoint. It seems very normal to say that, and it makes perfect sense to say, okay, well, we've got to be able to quantify it. It's got to have an endpoint at some point, because what is this progress for? Yet, blasphemy is around us everywhere. And we are presented with these things, which many people incorrectly think of as progress bars. These actually have a completely different name, and they're called throbbers. And throbbers have one distinction from progress bars, which is that they have an indeterminate endpoint. They give you no indication. They're meant to be these spinning, indeterminate progress bars that will tell you only one thing. Throbbers, and back in the days when progress bars were called thermometers, throbbers were called heartbeats. And throbbers, a very much more visceral word, it really is telling you one thing: I am alive. And that's useful, except that throbbers often lie. And I think anyone who's seen these graphics will tell you that it's all well and good to say you're alive, but what we're actually interested in is, are you busy doing something? I don't want to know that the power is going through the computer systems. I want to know that you're progressing me towards my goal. And so I wanted to make that distinction, because progress bars get a bad rap because of throbbers. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the second commandment here. So I've got 5. I don't have 10, so we'll speed through this. The second commandment: thy progression must always be forward. None shall reverse or reset it to 0. And unfortunately, because we're on a different computer, I don't have my clip for you, but I think it would be a very recognizable clip, which is a scene from Office Space. If you've seen that film, it's a scene in which a very tense moment, computer-based. We're loading a file onto a disk, and there is that frustrating progress bar that goes through the entire progression and then starts again, and then does it again and again. And these are telling us nothing. These are essentially throbbers again. We've gone away from progress bars that are actually always telling us you're moving incrementally towards your goal. I will never go back and say, oh, I made a mistake, I need to go back and fix this. Oh, I need to start again. Oh, great. This is getting to be a bit much. All right. Okay. There we go, 30%. So, the third commandment. There's a hierarchy of motion. It starts with acceleration. Acceleration is always better than constant speed. Constant speed is always better than deceleration. And deceleration is always better than unpredictable speed. And this speaks to, again, even back to the spear throwing analogy, is that we are very good at constant speed, but we prefer acceleration. And the reason is because of this effect called the peak end effect. Peak end effects trick us. They change the way that we perceive time. And it's a study that was done where you were given a choice of two different experiences, one that ended well and one that had something that was great right in the middle. And essentially what it came down to is that we perceive events by an average between the peak of the event, whether it's pleasure or pain, and the end of the event. And so if you were to take a big arc, you would say, okay, the peak is at the high point and the end is over here at the end of the arc. But these two are different in that the green line is accelerating, the red line is linear. We actually only perceive the peak and the end, and that is this last motion. You'll see that the green line is actually going much slower for quite some time, but it's at the end of the event that we understand the speed. We remember that speed. And so both the peak and the end are at the last moment in both of these charts, but because we perceive only that moment, the green line seems faster than the red line, because acceleration is always more pleasant when we're waiting than linear speed. There are other illusions that also trick our perceptions. These are some of the work that Chris Harrison has been doing at Carnegie Mellon. It's a bit of a viral video that's gone around. You'll be able to see it in action there. I recommend you searching for it. But two main things come out of this is that there are tricks, just visually, that help us to think that something's happening faster. In the first example, it's pulses. It's that the progress bar is flashing, and it's nothing to do, it's complete linear motion on a progress bar, but the pulsing of it increases in frequency. So it gives the illusion of acceleration, because as it pulses faster and faster, we feel as if it's starting to move faster, but it isn't. In the other, we have ripples, and Apple has done this very well. These ripples that come out almost as if it's waves coming out from the beachhead of the progress bar that are moving backwards and help us to propel the leading edge of the progress bar forward. They're illusions that actually, if you take them away, the progress bars look identical. But because you've added those, it helps our perception of time. Our perception of time is incredibly malleable. There are many other theories that I stumbled upon, but these are really the key ones to progress bars. And it speaks to the way that the motion and the speed needs to be handled. So the fourth commandment is a controversial commandment, but I believe strongly in it, which is, thou must do something after thy progress bar has completed. And what I mean by this is that after a progress bar completes, we expect the world to be different, even in some small way. And that's simple things. The file is successfully copied. The building that we've been fundraising for is going to be built. There are different things that are initiated on the end of a progress bar, but you would be surprised to find that there are progress bars that you might be recognizing that are blasphemous in this. This is a LinkedIn profile, and I think that LinkedIn is doing some really interesting things in this space, and as well as other companies. But LinkedIn, Farmville, and others, they're playing with a false assumption, which is that we so naturally believe that things will happen at the end of a progress bar that they're setting us up for that profile completeness where no action is actually happening. And that's the blasphemous moment, is that once you reach 100% of your progress bar, you're congratulated. And there isn't a difference to the way that LinkedIn approaches you or changes your profile or does much else. From the 95 to the 100%, there isn't a shift that takes place. And so it's a bit of a mind hack that goes on. But one thing that I want to point out, and so you'll need to remember just this moment, especially underneath each, because the fifth commandment, LinkedIn does exceptionally well. The fifth commandment is, thou shalt tell the user why he, in the biblical sense, may not proceed. Thou shalt tell the user why he may not proceed. LinkedIn does this brilliantly. All you need to do is look at this progress bar and say, okay, I need to add a summary. I need to add education. I need to add this, and I'll be moving forward. On the other side, the computer also needs to tell you why you can't proceed. You know, my progress is because I have to copy this file, and I can't do anything else until I'm completed, or at least you can't deal with the file until it's finished copying. There are reasons why you're being held up, and it needs to be explained to you. And the bonus round here is that this isn't actually a commandment, I thought, but I felt it was an interesting best practice, which is that sometimes people make use of the time very well, this waiting time, by presenting relevant information. And I think that the video games industry has just mastered this, which is that those load screens that often come up through gameplay in the console market is that you are presented with relevant information right at the moment that you're expecting it. You're getting tips on the next level. You're getting thoughts about a technique that you might not have used, things like that. There's ways to inform people, and I think you've probably found it that there are sometimes when you're installing programs, they'll give you a bit of a tour of the program as they're installing it, because making use of that time is really something that satisfies a user. So, what I wanted to talk about here is that just a moment. Okay. So these are really this games and installations and things. These are really the power progress bar users. What I wanted to showcase is that this idea of giving people relevant information while they're waiting is actually taken sort of to an extreme in one case, which is with YouTube. YouTube has kind of changed the whole model, which is that the progress bar is no longer the thing that you're waiting for and you're actually waiting for the end of it. It's become a meta layer on top of the media that you consume. As you see videos of my children here, you will see that there's a progress bar that's happening at the bottom that's showing me not only how much is played, but also how much is loaded. And so there's a double system that's going on. But what it's done is it's actually subverted what we've been forced for many years to do, which is media formats. We haven't had a way to tell people how long something is in the media world, and so we've been forced into things like the television half hour and the roughly 2-hour film and things like this to play to media expectations. But in the YouTube world and other places, we're able to tell people this is how long your experience is going to be as a meta layer on top of the media itself. And this is where you are in the experience. And so I just want to show it as a sort of extreme case of how this, I feel, is giving relevant information while a progress bar is happening, so much so that you forget that the progress bar is even a part of this experience. Oh. So, what we need to figure out is, why do these exist? Progress bars for me feel like an itch that needs to be scratched. It's this incompleteness that bothers us, and we naturally take steps to complete it. This is kind of classic gamification. I know that that's going to be the buzzword of many other panels. I mean, easy enough. We set up a goal, we give tools to reach it, we reward people when they do reach it. That's the way that a lot of these different applications have been doing this stuff. And I want you to think about just, in this parallel, a countdown, a launch countdown, the thousands of steps that need to be taken, just in the 10-second countdown that's happening. It's not in real time. People are counting down and checking through the steps as they're going. And you can think of just the anxiety that an aborted countdown creates in us. The idea that we can't reach our goal is a tension that we understand all the time. A few major sites are really leading the way. These are some examples that I prefer, and I know that there are others like DevHub that are doing things. I mean, these are some of the highest profiles that are doing profile completeness progress bars to encourage things, and also Mint is doing things like savings calculators and goal achievement, things like that. They're all being used in the same way to motivate user action by showing people what's happening. Oh, already, okay. All right, so. You're decelerating. We'll talk about it. So, these sites really work by creating this tension. We crave resolution to tension. And I know that there's a certain contingent of people in this room who are thinking there's one way to resolve this, and there's others that are thinking there's another way to resolve this, but we'll talk about that another day. We love seeing tension because we love seeing resolution. It's classic in the music world, to set up a musical passage that creates tension in the audience and then resolves it at the end. And so the only reason we like this is because we like it in the storytelling way. We like to be given that conflict and then have the resolution of it. And this, in a way, is what progress bars are doing. They're doing it through this thing called cognitive dissonance, which is the mismatch between our expectation and the reality that drives us, that we see. So we think that we are 100% complete as a person. When we see that LinkedIn, for example, feels that we're 60% complete, it is a cognitive dissonance that's set up. My expectations of myself are not reflected in the world that I see. And what we need to do is something that neurologists talk about as dissonance reduction. Dissonance reduction is where you take an action to change the situation, or, interestingly, to resolve it by ignoring it or discounting it. And there's a way that that's played down. So it's, our preferred action is to fix the world, and our secondary action is to change the way we feel about the world. Oh, who was saying I was decelerating here? Hang on. 60%. All right. Getting very close here. All right. So, I'm now 60% naked. And what I want to speak about is that progress bars, what they also mean to me is that they're a black box. They're really, really good at making a hidden process understandable. You can even see this at the bottom of our screen, is that a progress bar has been tracking along. You may not have any idea how long this presentation is. You assume it's an hour or so, but what it's actually doing is showing you visually where we are at in this storyline. So, it's really an interesting decision to have this kind of set it and forget it kind of mentality, where a progress bar takes a group of actions and boxes them into something that we understand quite well, and abstracts them. It's a layer of abstraction. All the computer scientists in this room are going to know about layers of abstraction and how those are useful for enabling users to do much more, because it keeps it out of our headspace. In fact, the quote that I really enjoyed about this was Alfred North Whitehead. He wrote in 1911 in his Introduction to Mathematics, he said, "Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations we can perform without thinking about them." It's really the way that we can do more without having to think about it all the time that creates our civilization. And it's this sort of black box mentality that says, okay, I trust you to go off and do these actions and come back and tell me when you're complete. And a progress bar allows that to become visualized. So, I'm sorry for my squeezed graphic in this one. I'll speak to it. The question for me is, does this mean that progress bars can advance our civilization? I mean, what can black boxes in our lives do to make our lives more understandable? And the examples I'll list here, which are hard to read, but what you're seeing in this compressed image is a new form of traffic light, the kind that counts down the don't walk section and tells you you've got 10 seconds, 30 seconds to cross the street. And it's more informative than the previous, blinking hand that we had before, which we never understood when that was going to end and how that was going to change. The other things that are listed here are airport delays. Did anyone have a delay in their flight down to South by Southwest? There's one here and a few others. And so there's not a lot of information given in airport delays. And it's a really interesting place where we might be able to inform our, quote, audience more. The people who are flying these planes, or the people who are flying in the planes, might be able to understand how long is this delay? Where are we in the progress of getting to my destination? Also, waiting rooms are a black box. We never know what's happening behind that wall, and we're waiting at the time, and we would like to understand where the progress is happening. Things like the Postal Service. We've also seen FedEx and UPS and other companies are doing things like package tracking that are telling us where is the progress physically of where is this package going. Sometimes it's surprising where they go. But Postal Service is an interesting place because we drop that envelope into the box and we have no sense of all the processes that are happening behind the scenes that could be made visible to us. Things like oven timers, even retirement savings, all of these different ideas for how progress bars can change the way that we are comfortable with parts of our lives that we are not in control of. The black boxes of our life. So the question I have is, what's going to happen when our technology, our Moore's Law, takes us to the place where it compresses the processing time? It makes the delays that we are so used to in our past 10 years of computer experience, it takes those traditional waiting experiences and just shrinks them until they're virtually invisible. Let's imagine a world where we have instantaneous response to all requests via technology and machines. It's a lofty goal, but there are parts of me that believe it. What does that mean? It means that our progress bars are no longer about somebody, us being out of control. And it shifts the focus. It shifts it away from machines dictating how far something's progressed to people talking about the progress of their own actions. It changes it so that, it's a way for us to guide and monitor human processes, so individually and collectively. But there's a problem when we do that, which is that human beings break the rules all the time. The commandments that we've gone through in these progress bars that seem reasonable and, in fact, a very nice way to think of progress bars get completely broken down when you realize that we're not very good at quantifying things. We're unpredictable. It's hard to chart linear progress with all of the different variables that humanity brings to the table. It's hard to do it in the technical side, but it's easier than in the human world. And then the final thing, I think, is interesting to me as I tried to apply progress bars to almost every facet of my life is that we don't always know when things are done. Consider art as an idea, and the idea of a piece of art and at what point it becomes complete. And other things that we do, like our education. When is our education complete? And open-ended things that humans deal with all the time that are not suited to the world of progress bars, that black boxing behavior. And so what I'm hoping that we can do is open up this talk to a bit of a discussion, because I would love to welcome your questions and have this debate, because sometimes it's not always about quantifying things. It's also about the quality of the work that we're doing. And as I take my last 70% and discard my watch, you'll see that I've actually removed 7 pieces of the 10 pieces of clothing that I was wearing. And I'm now 70% naked. The punchline here, for all of you who are actually here to see a strip show, is that there's 30% that really matters. And we don't think of progress bars in this way. When it comes to copying a file, all actions are equal. Progress bars move linearly across, but we don't actually know what's hard and what's easy. But in the human world, we do know what's hard and what's easy, and we know what matters and what doesn't matter. And by trying to quantify everything into this gamification world that drives us through motivation, it forces us to think of all things being equal. And as I'm here, 30% of my clothes remaining, I think everyone here would agree that there is no nudity here, that it's actually a much different skew, that you might think that I am 10% naked, or whatever that might be. But these are the scales that progress bars mess with, is that apart from 0% and 100%, everything in between is subjective. And that those qualitative discussions are the parts where, as we apply these principles of using cognitive dissonance to push us forward into the space, we run up against these issues. So, at this point, I was hoping that we would be able to get to a point where we could welcome some questions. And I've got some other points that I was going to make, but I would really like to achieve 100% completion with you collaboratively. And so I would welcome people to come up and to see if there were thoughts that were triggered in this discussion and continue the debate. So, if anyone would like to join me at the microphone, is there anyone who's thought hard about this and the UI involved in it? I'm imagining there's a lot of usability people who are probably here, and the user experience folks. Hi.
Hi. Just a quick comment, really. About the postal service, I don't know how it works here, but in Denmark, and I think it's not just the postal service, but a couple of other things, since you can't give people an endpoint, you try to give them a different kind of progress bar. So instead of telling them when your package will actually arrive, you get a track and trace system, so you can sit there and go through your own sort of mental progress bar, even though it doesn't give you an end. So.
Right, yeah, and I've seen that as well, is that you get a chance to see where your package is right now, and what you were saying is that you then estimate your own amount of progress. You think, well, it's closer, so I feel like it's getting there. And I certainly understand that. There is a big, as you research this place, this industry, you find that there's controversy around the indeterminate progress bars, which were created by the computer science world because it wasn't really appreciated what an impact it would have on our frustrations with technology. Because there's a lot of actions that are actually indeterminate in the computer world, it made a lot of sense to create bars that said, I'm always going to be shifting my expectations. And there's a really great XKCD comic strip about this, about the Windows file copy, the expert, the maker of the file copy system, saying, he's driving his car and he says, I'll be there in 15 minutes. No, 6 days. No, I'll be there in 30 seconds. And this constant updating of your expectations, which at the time seemed reasonable because that's the way that computers work. They have no sense of when they're going to be complete because they're just doing the task at hand. There's a completely separate meta layer that doesn't really exist that estimates how much of this is real progress. And as a result, progress bars have had a bad name. That linear motion, that optimal, perfect progress bar that starts and just fills the screen and ends exactly when we predict, which is I feel the most natural form of UI that you can have, doesn't really exist, and it doesn't exist in the Postal Service as well because it moves always. There's a snowstorm in a certain part of Denmark, and it totally disrupts the system, and it says, "Oh yeah, that never happens," and it says, we've got to change our expectations. That's a reasonable thing to ask. Sorry, I've got you standing here. Thank you.
I came because I sort of had this interesting problem on our website, which is how do we get people to do long time-based things repeatedly, so you have sort of a meta progress and then an individual progress component. But actually, you sort of cued a much more interesting thought in my mind. So I do medical predictions. We tell people what's going to happen to them based on their medical data. And we work with sort of vector models of conditions in life itself. And of course, the sum vector of one's life is 0 because you start and end in the same place. And it's interesting because we put these background, essentially progress bars in the context of terminal illnesses for patients. We've actually intuitively done the opposite of your acceleration thing, which is that we tend to shock people with a little more perception of speed now.
That would make sense, is
And
that
then
you want your...
Yeah.
We want to see it decelerate as you get closer to that date.
And I hadn't thought about the presentation of sort of predictive health data as a progress bar itself, and a lot of the things, your commandments came up, make actually interesting. Sometimes you want them to go backwards. It was a good presentation.
Great. Well, that's actually a really interesting thing because there are other things than progress bars. They aren't always like progress bars measure progress, right? But there are other things which are percentage calculations that are measured in a different way. Where am I at? There's nothing that says that we're unable to comprehend, a fluctuating meter. It's a meter that's happening there that's telling you this is, the temperature, this is where it goes up and down. The thermometer metaphor was actually a terrible metaphor for progress bars because thermometers just constantly fluctuate up and down. They never progress towards a goal. It's only those charity thermometers that go forward. The real thermometers don't, which is why I think they dropped the metaphor. That thermometers is a bad way to describe it. The idea of taking heartbeats and turning them into throbbers was a bizarre sort of sexualization in my mind. But there are other things than progress bars, and I think it's interesting that everyone does have, as you say, that 100% dead moment.
So far.
But it's an interesting and a tricky way to visualize where you are in that qualitative path. So thank you for bringing that to us.
The other thing about that that's really interesting is that all you can really calculate is the probability of death because it's not deterministic. So it's this sort of opposite problem. Your ending point is moving based on other data, and you have to communicate that. But,
exactly. Great. Thank you. It's fascinating.
I only saw the last 20%, but that was really good. So you may have covered this already. In a behavioral human sense, there's a lot of things that defy linear progress. So learning to play tennis, that sort of thing. There's lots of long periods of plateau, or there's parts where you actually step back, but people want to see a sense of progress all the time. And I think most people fall out of learning a skill when they feel progress is not coming anymore. How can you reconcile people's need for progress in things where it's not immediately happening?
Right. No, and that's a key. I mean, I think that's a key in that in this gamification trend, it's a key because people do like to have little rewards all the way along the experience, and they don't want to hit those moments, as you say, of those plateaus where it says, you've got to get through this heavy section. It's going to be a few months before you get to that next reward, and that's disheartening. And so, I mean, there's something to be said for some of the illusions that games can create where they can without creating real rewards, they're actually sort of creating the illusion of incremental progress, even though there is that plateau. They can sort of hide that plateau. But, it's what I learned in my research through this is that it's the feedback that seems to be the thing that's the crucial part, is that really all of this progress is a feedback loop for me to understand something. And there are lots of examples where you add layers of feedback to it, where you say, I'm going to put a text description that says what I'm doing right now as a computer or as a company. And with the proper amount of meta information, it may make those things understandable, I feel. Is that to know that, okay, we're going to get through this plateau, and this is the way that we're going to do it, and explaining it that way.
As long as people feel like there's something going on.
Right.
You don't have to move forward. You just have to feel like you're
exactly
part of the... Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, to be prepared for the patience they'll need for the next phase or something like that.
Cool. Thank you.
It's great. Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. This is wonderful.
Hey,
Hi.
so it's interesting that you brought up the Windows file copy, because I was kind of thinking about it as I was sitting here.
Right.
And it almost seems like an attempt to get rid of a throbber, because it's, thinking about it, I almost prefer, even though the time left is kind of playing with your mind, 3 minutes, 8 minutes, I almost prefer that over a throbber.
Right.
So
That at least
maybe we
it's
need to
trying
give
to estimate.
the developer a little bit of credit for trying to get rid of a throbber. But my question is, are there any ways to eliminate the throbber?
Well, the developer's working with the problems of their job, which is that they can't actually get a definite answer out of that box. Every time that they poll the computer, they get a different response.
Right.
Because there's just certain types of, the mechanical actions that are unpredictable, and they sometimes they take longer than others. And sometimes you hit a chunk where it's like, okay, now this is a really dense. Like, for instance, file copy, most of the reason that file copy fluctuates so much is because of the scattering of data on a disk. Is that they try to estimate by saying all of this disk is completely defragmented, and I just copy from here to here, and I know that my disk spins this fast, and this is how long it's going to take. And then they hit a problem, which is they go, whoa, the data's not in there anymore. It's actually addressed over here, and they got to spin all the way over here and do that. And that is where they're constantly adjusting, is because they're saying, okay, well, no, I hit a section that's pretty good, so I can lower my number now. And they're trying to be optimistic. The thing that I've seen, the trick I've seen, is to just always be overestimating indeterminate progress bars because of this accelerating motion. People never complain when the estimates are moved down. They say it's gone from 10 minutes to 5 minutes to 2 minutes to 30 seconds, and it's done. That's okay. I understand that you were adjusting. It's when it goes up and down and swings all around that it really starts to frustrate people because they have no sense of where it's going. And so the trick of the trade there is to say, okay, yes, it's going to be a lot of time. Oh, and then I think it's going to be less and less. But playing the safe bet by perhaps starting with the assumption that the data is completely defragmented and then coming back down to it at another level.
And keep those expectations low, and then surprise them in the end.
Well, I think people are trying to always show the smallest amount of time. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi. Do we have time?
Yes, we got 10 minutes.
Okay, so kind of more of a comment or anecdotal question for you. So we make kids properties. I'm just wondering, in your work, when do you think this desire or need to kind of measure your progress begins? Because we're making things for preschool demographic, and I guess it's just more. Do you have any comments on that, or?
From what I've seen, progress bars are like a universal language. From what I've found is that it crosses cultures very easily. There's been language issues with all sorts of technology, but progress bars seem to work across cultures just fine. They see it, and you think of it just being like at this instinctual level. Okay, that's moving, and then it hit the goal over here. Good, I understand that. It's hard to imagine that that's going to be a disrupt. And I think that children are also capable of totally understanding that when this, cute bunny rabbit reaches the hole over here, then something's going to happen. They can see the path happening. and they know that the progression of time is going to include that. So I don't think from what I've learned so far, it seems like it's such a deep-rooted understanding of progress that it's actually the things that we've added, the problems that we've added that make it disruptive. The parts where the endpoint moves, the parts where we don't tell anyone what's actually happening or what they're going to get at the end or what you need to do to move it forward. Those are the times where progress bars fail. But I would easily put a cute progress bar into a preschool project without worrying about them understanding it. Great.
Hey.
Hi.
I'm going to preface this by saying this is going to sound really evil, I think, but oh well. Like, you gave an example of a few websites that use progress bars to get people to pretty much like fill out their status updates and things
Yeah.
like that.
Let's
I kind of
talk
see
about
that
it.
as sort of like a very good exploitation of human tendency, and like you don't necessarily need to offer a reward, because even if people realize that they're kind of getting like gamed, they'll
Right.
still be compelled to complete that system. So I guess I'm wondering, like,
Yeah.
I kind of see that as like obviously something that a lot of sites are going to kind of continue to trend towards.
Yep.
But do you think that there's kind of going to be some sort of a backlash where, I mean, maybe people will just either start to gravitate away from websites that do that, or possibly like
Well-
start to be able to ignore them in a way that we're able to like ignore advertisements and stuff?
Right. I think that is, the cognitive dissonance, it's really was interesting to me that there are two methods, solving the problem or ignoring the problem. And I think that people may choose to say, I'm happy with my profile being 75% complete, and I can ignore that because I'm actually, I'm changing the worldview by saying that it doesn't matter anymore. And that's a solution to cognitive dissonance. I think, though, that there's an easier solution, which is that all people are expecting is that something's going to be different, is that you've motivated somebody through this mental trick to get all the way to the end, and then why are you not doing anything? Like, what's the big deal? Like there's features to these sites that could be opened at that point or could be changed so that you do really feel like, as a 100% person of a profile, you've earned something through your progress in that space. And I think that it's just a shame that that's not being capitalized on, that, like OkCupid, that you couldn't actually get additional contacts or something. You couldn't do something more when you've got 100% complete, so that, you feel like you're a part of that sort of elite group as opposed to all the rest of us who are just incrementally increasing their progress. It's just a simple twist, but right now everyone is focused on using this trick to get people to the end, right? It's a motivator, and like that itch to be scratched, but it could also be a reward system as well.
Well, and also, like you just said, sites like OkCupid or any example site, it's sort of hurting everybody, I suppose, to violate your rule, because it's teaching people that filling out and completing the progress bar doesn't necessarily give them anything guaranteed, and
Right.
as a result, they're going to be like slightly less motivated, and they'd be more likely to go with the other solution of like ignoring it, like you said.
Exactly. And I think, in parts of like telling people the steps along the way that they need to take, it's also good to tell them what's going to happen at the end. We're going to be able to build this community center now that we've raised these funds and things like that. So
Thanks.
thank you. I've got 5 minutes, and I'm going to try and get through 2 questions. Thank you.
Hello. I want to make one point and then a question on that point that kind of follows up on what he was saying that I don't think got answered. It
For
kinda
sure.
got mixed in the shuffle. You mentioned, and I don't know if you really thought about it when you said it, but you mentioned that throbbers were an invention of computer scientists, and they're really not. Native Americans would use smoke signals, and as long as the smoke was rising, things were fine. And if
Right.
when the smoke stops, something's going on. Medieval times, they would use fires for the same reason, where if you see this fire burning, you're fine. It's, nothing's changing basically when the fire
Right.
stops.
As long as this is happening, everything's okay.
Things are going on,
Right.
and you're good.
And that's what throbbers should be.
Yeah, and I
that-
think when you think about like loading a website, it's a very indeterminate thing based on so many factors, and you've got that throbber that says I'm loading. Okay, something's changed. The state has changed, and I think that's a very ingrained thing, similar to the progress bar, similar to the linear motion with an end goal. I think throbbers have that same ingrained notion, is that something in the world has changed, and so the question that he posed is, do you think throbbers in computer world, especially applications and in the context of what we've been talking about, should go away, or if they should be replaced with something, or what?
Well, I agree that there's a place for them. I think the sin of throbbers has been that they've been horribly abused in that they've been connected to parts of computers that lie in a way that when I disbelieve that a throbber will eventually end. I've seen them freeze computers. But if we could get past that, I think they'd be a huge difference. That we would just say, oh, it's still working away. I mean, the older computers used to have those hard drive lights that would just blink when it was moving the hard drive, and those were more believable because you knew that there was a physical action happening there, so something must be happening. But there's also, I just think that throbbers, as long as we acknowledge that they only tell you one thing, which is everything's fine and I'm busy right now, and the smoke signals is a great example. I think that we're fine. I think what the problem is that it's become an easier solution, and that the indeterminate progress bars can just be replaced by throbbers, and there's different parts where they fill that space.
Well, and what he was saying was that we used, I forget who it was that was saying about progress bars being used evilly. I think people use throbbers the same way. They just throw up a throbber like, I'm doing something, probably,
Right.
I might not.
Right. Exactly. And that's just a lack of, respect for the audience in a way, is that, we're just not communicating that. Okay, our last question.
Thanks. Great speech. I have a question for you, sort of maybe in a general sense. There's this sort of cultural truism toward entitlement that seems to be happening. I notice in like my kids' schools how everyone gets an award at every assembly at some point during the course of the year. Right. And piecing together some of the stuff you're talking about that I see, like on Foursquare, they just added a progress bar. You're starting to constantly get rewards for things. You started talking about how these guys are doing that. Any relationship you think between the sort of constant reward system and what's happening in terms of people's sense of entitlement?
Well, I really like talking about gamification in an economy sense, and some of the stuff that I found was actually economy, like peak and end effects is actually a Nobel Prize winning idea in economy. It's a Nobel Prize for economy, and I think that with this gamification trend of points, it's setting up an economy of points, and like when you dump a lot of extra currency into an economic system, you end up with inflation. And inflation just devalues the currency. And it's the same thing, is that the more Foursquare points you give out, the less a Foursquare point is worth. The more trophies you give out for merit in, social studies or whatever it is, then the less it gets you a job, because it doesn't really, everybody, and we've seen it, in fact, in the credentialing world of, a lot of people feel that they can't really enter a career without a bachelor's degree, and so it becomes sort of the norm that university education is a must-have instead of high school education, which used to be the mandatory standard. And so it's just raising that bar up and up and up, and it's a dangerous thing because it's a devaluing of it. I don't know how that, progress bars are about defining beginnings and ends, and I don't know if they would be devalued in the same way, just because they choose the parameters, and if they choose to devalue the actions in between, it's okay, because it's actually meant to hide them completely. Progress bars are meant to just say something's going to happen from 0 to 100%, and you don't need to know about it. It could be 1,000 operations, or it could be 3 operations. And so I'm not worried that it'll fall prey to the same issue, because it is actually meant to hide that and get rid of the idea of there being any kind of value to it. All I care about are the time it's going to take me to get there. Right. But I think it's interesting in this larger gamification discussion about whether or not things like an indeterminate progress bar might be applied to that, where you just say, okay, you're getting 100 points, and now the benchmark is 150 points, and they keep moving the goalpost. Yeah. Because if they keep moving the goalpost, then you are going to suffer those same effects. Where now you say, well, what about all the effort I made to get to point A, when you define point B as the new endpoint?
Yeah, and that totally just happened with the Foursquare thing. They put this progress bar, I hit it this morning, and I was like, okay.
Really?
Yeah, there was nothing to be gained from it.
Yeah. So, that's definitely, even a child will tell you, like, moving the goalpost is not fair. You know, you set it up, and I want to reach it. And that's what progress bars are about. It's about getting us to those goals.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for all your help in making this presentation possible.